Thank you for that very kind introduction and making Camilla feel very old.
Yes.
That was very kind of you. It's a real pleasure to be here with you guys this evening. We can spend some time together and hopefully chat in the reception afterwards. And it's a pleasure for a few reasons. Firstly, it's a pleasure because we're always happy to support Broad Beer and all the great work that they do. But it's also a real pleasure to talk about this topic because John's talked about it. It's what is on most of the global marketing community's mind, but not many people are doing it well. So hopefully we're going to give you some views and some insights that are going to help you, because you don't have to be a marketing executive with 50 million euros worth of investment. This can be something that can be done at any level. And lastly, it's a real pleasure to be here because, as Camilla knows, I'll jump at any chance of a trip to Dublin. So it's even if it is raining. So let's talk about who we are just for a minute, in case you don't know us. So the Futures Company, myself and Camilla, what we do is we help our clients unlock new sources of growth. And what we do, we have global proprietary knowledge and consulting, and we use that to help our clients understand where a consumer's heading and what's the market landscape going to be like. So foresight in terms of understanding global consumer trends, shifting values and attitudes around the world. We do survey work in that area. We have global networks of trend spotters around the world. So we bring you insight not just from the UK, but from Africa, from Asia, Latin America. And then futures work, which is about scenario planning, looking at those big structural drivers of change, regulation, technology, macroeconomic change, and putting those two things together to help our clients understand, to look forward about where their shoppers and consumers are heading, what that landscape's going to look like, what some opportunities might be that they can act on today. In terms of our relationship with Broad Beer, it's 7 years. My life, that is Camilla's, you've just defined Camilla's role now, I've just realised, for 7 years. And actually you pretty much have worked on Broad Beer all of that time. So we've worked for Broad Beer for quite a few years now on project work around thought leadership, around brand positioning, and most sort of consistently around things like feeling the pinch, understanding the economic downturn's impact on consumer and shopper behaviour and broader lifestyle trends. But in terms of what we're going to talk about today in this session, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And what you do simply proves what you believe. Now this quote's a really interesting quote in terms of to think about during this presentation, because consumers are incredibly smart, incredibly savvy now. And when we talk about the power of the retailers, as John's talked about, that's absolutely right. The retailers do have a lot of power. But if you take the 70s and 80s into the 90s as the era of brands, when basically brand owners had the control in the marketplace around the world, we then shifted into an era of retail power, when frankly you were lucky if the retailer wanted to stock you on their shelves, and retailers have very much controlled that route to market and dictated the pace and the tone to brands. But what we're shifting to now is back to an era of consumers, because with social media, falling cost of internet shopping, home delivery, digital sort of ways of connecting with brands in lots of different categories, actually the power is shifting away from the retailers. And when we work with them now, actually what they want to do is find better ways to connect to consumers. And when consumers, all of you in this room, can choose any brand on this planet, any SKU you want and have it delivered to your home, what are you going to choose? You have so much choice. You're going to choose brands that have a meaning, have an opinion, have a purpose that connects with you and who you are. And they'll be the brands that actually people are going to gravitate towards over time. And the great thing is, it doesn't matter whether you're an SME or a big multinational corporation, actually with the advent and falling cost of digital technology, broadband, 4G going up as much across Africa as across Western Europe, it means that the cost of reaching the consumer and getting your message out is falling rapidly. So there's opportunities here for everybody. Now, what we're going to cover in this presentation, we're going to first of all talk about what's the need that's driving this for brands to stand for something, and then we're going to talk around 7 key principles, almost like a checklist, that you could consider thinking about in your business and hopefully you'll find useful. 7 principles to bear in mind in terms of creating brands with meaning. And we'll give you an example of something from around the world that we think exemplifies each of those quite well, and then we'll pull it together with some thoughts at the end.
Great. Okay, so as Henry said, we're going to start by thinking about what it is that's driving this need for brands with meaning, where that's coming from in terms of a consumer desire and a consumer point of view. And this is kind of grounded in a longer-term macro trend that we have seen kind of continuing. If you think about consumers declining trust in established institutions, be it banks, be it the media, be it big companies who are perceived to not be paying their taxes, this is a trend that we've seen kind of continue. And this work by Douglas Atkin in the book, The Culting of Brands, he focuses on what that dynamic is doing in terms of changing brands' roles in society and in people's lives. And this is a really interesting quote, and I'm just going to read it to you if you guys can see it at the back. So what he says is that we've reached a unique intersection in society that favours marketers. And on the one hand, we have established institutions proving to be increasingly inadequate sources of meaning and community. And on the other hand, there's been a growth, as Henry said, of a very sophisticated kind of consumerism. So as long as we see this trend towards traditional institutions failing, and as long as marketers remain sophisticated, then brands can become credible sources of meaning, community and meaning. And I think this is a fantastic quote because it kind of sums up everything that we want to kind of leave you with today. And the other thing to notice here is the word credible, and I think we'll come back to that as being a very kind of key sort of cornerstone of how you can think about building brands that have meaning and that kind of connect with consumers now. So just to take a kind of level down, and if we think about this from a consumer point of view, we've identified three sort of real drivers that are pushing towards this dynamic. And the first, as Henry's already talked about, is considered consumption. If we think about, as Henry talked about, some of the dynamics around choice and access to information and how we are, what we expect of brands now, the kind of savvy and sophisticated consumer is really changing the way in which the role that brands need to play. The desire to make a difference. This is particularly interesting. I think we have a quantitative survey where we track consumer attitudes to a variety of different things, and we've asked people for many years how important it is to them to be able to make a difference in the world and in their lives. And despite the kind of pressures that we see people being under, this is an area where people's aspirations remain really high and really strong, so we haven't seen the desire to make a difference go away. It's really important to consumers, and again, that expectation of the role that brands can play is kind of being dialed up all the time. And finally, what we're calling the sort of search for the genuine, and this kind of encompasses some of the elements that we've talked about already, about people looking for points of connection, looking for things they can trust, things they can value, things that are sort of tangible and sort of connect with their lives in difficult and uncertain times. So just to take a look at some of the data, and this top question is from our Feeling the Pinch survey, which we asked in the UK and Ireland. It was fielded earlier this year. But what we're seeing is, people approaching the marketplace in a very different way. So we asked people, how they approach purchase decisions, and we've seen a steep increase in the number of people saying, I find myself thinking twice before making even the smallest day-to-day purchase. So that's gone up 21% in Ireland in the last sort of 4 years, another big increase in the UK. So we're seeing people really scrutinise every purchase they're making, even though it's small, and they're doing their research. Again, this is a question from our Global Monitor survey, and it's a similar level of agreement across our 22 markets. But close to 70% of people say they're increasingly likely to spend time researching a product before they make a purchase. So this is a very savvy, educated consumer who is scrutinising every kind of purchasing decision and looking to really get more from the brands that they're buying.
When we think about skepticism that Camilla's talked about, trust has fallen. Trust has fallen in brands as a collective group. It's fallen in government. It's fallen in community groups in lots of instances. And I guess a lot of things that we as all individuals sort of had our faith in has proven to be built on quite shaky foundations over the last couple of years. And unfortunately, every story, whether it's a Starbucks or whether it's an Amazon or something, doing something that we wish they didn't, it continues to reinforce that skepticism. And you can see that it comes out from a consumer perspective around skepticism around claims made in brands, advertising, and the fact that consumers genuinely will think that all of you, as a group, will only make social responsibility claims to sell me as a consumer more stuff. We don't believe you have a genuine altruistic or societal sort of desire behind it. So that's the scepticism. It may not exist with your brand specifically and your consumers because of trust you've built, but the company you keep is generally judged by these standards. And actually, what we do see, though, is that consumers are thinking, you know what, I do want to make a difference. You know, there are things I can do through the choices I make and the actions I take to actually have a practical difference. So again, thinking about brands that I want to spend with. There'll be certain categories of consumption, certain brands and certain areas where, you know what, I can actually choose. I can choose company X over company Y, and I will put more of my money that way, because if I have the option, I think they're going to be better for the environment, or I think they're going to be making a positive contribution. And lastly, in terms of the search for the genuine, there's a huge appetite that we see for, you know, brands that have a genuine meaning. Because what people really want is brands to actually start taking some of the load, focus on making things better. So it's not just about environment, but it's about social responsibility, it's about workplace ethics, it's about supply chain transparency. There's lots of different elements here, but you can sort of see from the quotes there, 70% think companies and brands should play a role in improving the quality of life and well-being, but less than a quarter think brands work hard at this. And I think it's a very interesting, if you're into history and you're into the cycles of history, and I'm a big history buff, is you look back to where a lot of the big companies started at the turn of the last century. You think of a Cadbury's or a Roundtree's, we were talking about confectionery earlier. Quite often they had a commercial aim and they had a social aim at the same time. The two were connected. And I think what consumers are starting to see when it's hitting them in terms of real falling income is actually just a pure focus on commercial gain doesn't necessarily give me a benefit. So we're starting to see a bit of a shift now with people thinking, actually, what are you doing more than, you know, driving your P&L going forward?
Okay, so let's draw you back to the quote that Henry kind of mentioned at the start of the presentation. And what we're going to lay out now is, if we think about the kind of drivers and the environment that the brands sort of find themselves in, and the changing role that the consumers expect them to play in their lives and in society, what is it that we can do as brand owners, as brand builders, I guess to raise our game and to take our consumers and to take people with us? And this is a nice little checklist to help us think about the different ways that we should be thinking about building our brands. So perhaps we need to move people from thinking purely about value to thinking about values and what our values are and how we can express that to consumers and make it sort of live and make it relevant in their lives. Perhaps we need to move from thinking purely about benefit and a product benefit to a belief, what we believe in as a brand and how we can use our products and our messaging and marketing communications to communicate that in a meaningful way that really connects. From positioning to philosophy, this is sort of really interesting. So obviously positioning is still very important, but it has to be grounded in a kind of core philosophy and a core set of values and a point of view. And that's the way in which we can really build a sort of USP and a point of difference. And some of the examples that you'll see kind of later on in the deck really showcase brands that have done this incredibly well. And how can we take people on this journey? If we're thinking about building longer-term relationships with people, given the kind of threat of sort of own label and how we can kind of galvanize that loyalty, we need to be thinking about moving people away from a more passive sort of purchase transactional kind of model and getting them to think about participation. And a great way to do that is to focus less on a kind of campaign mindset and think about it in terms of a movement, a kind of energy. And again, this is based around a point of view and our philosophy and our beliefs and our values. And finally, the kind of encompassing element here, this move from products to principles. And again, that kind of sets up the kind of system of belief and how we communicate our point of view and how we sort of walk the walk, as it were. So this is just to kind of communicate how we see, brands with meaning and brands that stand for something kind of living and existing, and really a brand that has kind of compelling meaning thinks, it acts, it communicates from the core, and everything radiates from that core. So the why has to be at the center. This is why you do it, this is our purpose, this is our belief, and actually this is why people should care. This is why people should kind of interact with us and build some kind of affinity with us. And beyond the why comes the how. So this is our how we do it, this is how we do it better than our competitors, and it's about kind of grounding a point of difference in a strong point of view. And the what really comes last. So it's almost about turning that model in the way that we have sort of thought about brands on its head, and the why really sits at the core, and then everything radiates from the center.
Now, I'm sure you're thinking, this is all very well and good, Henry, Camilla, but how am I actually going to turn some commercial benefit off this? Because it's great to have these thoughts and these talks and a bit of stimulation, but what's it going to do for my commercial growth, for my bottom line? Well, I would urge you to look at one of our sister companies, Millward Brown, did some work with Jim Stengel, who was the ex-global chief marketing officer of Procter & Gamble. They did work over a 10-year period. The book is called Grow. I have no royalties that I get from this, so I haven't got any self-interest. They track brands having clear meaning outperformed the Standard & Poor consistently in commercial growth over a 10-year period. So when they looked to identify this in a P&L specific way, they found brands that did it well outperformed the rest of their peer group in categories. And a really important point that Camilla's made is about beliefs and values. One of the biggest challenges you all have is getting people to work for you, getting talented people to want to work in an industry such as food and drink. It's not something for Ireland, it's a global phenomenon, because if you speak to any Gen Y coming through, they want to work in technology, they want to work in comms, they want to work in, the really exciting parts of the world as they see it. And a big challenge is actually, how do you market yourself to your staff? You give them a sense of purpose, you make them want to come and give them your talent. The talent wars are going to be increasingly difficult over the years ahead, and actually having a clear meaning and a set of values makes it easier for potential candidates to think why they want to work with you versus go to work with Google, Facebook, Instagram, all those other companies who are frankly hiring fast. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk around 7 key principles of brands that mean for something, and we're going to move at a relatively rapid pace because I know you've got champagne. Is it champagne or is it fizzy water? I'm not sure. It depends on the day. You've got something waiting that's cold apparently. So we're going to talk you through these 7 principles, and we're around for the evening, so feel free to catch us afterwards. And for each of them, we're going to talk through sort of the checklist, what it's about, and give you an example of a brand that's doing something. So if we go to the first one, identifying cultural tensions. I think one of the interesting things, and we do this for a lot of our clients, is we tend to look at the world and think about, where does my brand fit? What does my category mean for consumers? Maybe what are some of the barriers, some of the, the pain points consumers have with my category? Absolutely nothing wrong with that at all. That's the way we've all worked. What we find people starting to do more is to look at cultural tensions. Brands are built really strongly around cultural tensions, so things that exist in society where there's tension. If you look at the UK at the moment, a great example is immigration. It's a very difficult territory to talk about, but actually there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of energy, positive and negative in that area, and there's an area that people care about. And what do you want to be? You want people to care about you and your brand, so you have to connect with them in that space. So thinking bigger than your category, thinking about what could be potential tensions is a really good starting point. Now, let's have a look at an example of a brand who does that. There's a company called Leon, I think it's Leon. I've never heard them pronounce it. They started in 2004. They had 1 restaurant. Their aim by 2020 is to have 2,000. I don't think they're quite going to get there. They've got quite a few more. They're in the hundreds now, but I think 2,000 is a big stretch. And what they identified, and they're very clear about, is the cultural tension is all around obesity, and that fast food, convenience, doesn't have to be bad. That's their passionate belief. Fast food and convenience. They hate people who just go on about healthy food and talk about scratch cooking and everything else, and they talk very openly about that because they know that generally a lot of people don't have time, don't have skills to do that. And what they believe, and you can see it there, is the belief that food should taste good and do you good, and that everyone should be able to enjoy this. So they're talking about convenience, they're talking about health, and they're talking about a good value proposition out there. So they've taken a stand, they've identified a tension that's very topical out there, and it is slightly out of the sphere of just being a standard restaurant, and they're growing incredibly well off the back of it because people like to gravitate towards people who have opinions.
Okay, so Henry's already mentioned this, taking a stand. Our second principle is putting a stake in the ground, having a point of view on an issue. So once you've looked at some of those bigger tensions, it's about having a point of view and saying, where are we going to put our stake in the ground on this issue? And actually, as Henry said, it's about looking sort of beyond the category, but it's really important that the issue has some kind of connection with the kind of category, so you can connect with consumers at that level. But one of the kind of key things about this is very often it requires being brave and kind of sticking your neck out and having a point of view, and perhaps some of the biggest opportunities come on those issues which are still emerging. Perhaps they're niche issues which haven't hit the mainstream. Perhaps consumers don't even know about these issues. That's where some of the biggest opportunities lie, and that requires quite a lot of bravery to lead on those issues and have a point of view. Again, probably just worth saying here, how can we own this issue? It has to be something which isn't a crowded space, which isn't owned already by existing brands, but this has got to be something that we can own and we can champion, and we can be known in consumers' minds for tackling this issue. And again, as Henry sort of said, this is about understanding what's important in consumers' lives. So it has to kind of connect to them. And if you think about the issues which are most important to people, it's the things that sort of affect us, our health, our family, our lives, our kind of the environment in which we live in. Those are the types of issues where you get that really strong connection with people. And a nice example of this is Whole Foods and what they've done in the US, I think at the beginning of the year or mid throughout the year. They've looked at what's happening in the US food landscape around GMO, and this is becoming an issue where consumers are becoming much more vocal. And they have decided that they are going to take a position of leadership, and they're going to kind of champion clarity around labelling from a consumer point of view. So this is not a commitment which other retailers are making. They are taking leadership on this issue, and they're saying, we understand that there's no mandatory labelling for GMO. It's incredibly difficult for consumers to understand what goes into their food, but from our point of view, we are going to ensure absolute clarity by, I think it's 2018, in terms of labelling around this issue. That's what we're going to stand for. The CEO says we're putting a stake in the ground on this issue. They know it means something to consumers. This issue is highly bound in concerns around sort of health and sustainability and the knock-on effects. And it matches perfectly with the kind of brand positioning and that sort of stand for natural and wholesomeness. So it resonates with consumers. They're tapping into that kind of cultural sensitivity around an issue which is important and becoming more important to people. And they're taking a stance, and they are saying, we will lead the industry on this. So this is kind of a great example of a company that's sort of taking a side and having a strong point of view.
So you've identified an issue, you've thought about some cultural tensions, you've decided you're going to take a side and make a stand about it. And it's great, because actually for once you're going to have a consumer or a shopper saying, I don't like what you stand for, but I respect the fact you have an opinion. Well, at least they're talking about you, at least they're thinking about you, and that's what people like Whole Foods are doing. It's better to be polarising and get in the conversation than be just on the periphery. But a real important step, and Camilla talked about it earlier, is credibility. If it does not ring true, if it is not relevant and resonant with who you are as a business, you will get found out. Somebody will dig something up, they will post it all over the internet, and you will do yourself more damage than good. And importantly, these things aren't just marketing communications, they're about beliefs and value systems. It's got to make sense to your supply chain, it's got to make sense to your finance team, to your HR team, to your people who work on your factory shop floors. Because if it makes true to them, they become the best advocates of your company. It gives them a reason of why they want to get out of bed and come to work for you every morning. So it's got to be very true to the DNA. I'll give you a good personal example of a company who does this incredibly badly. I commute into London most days at an exorbitant and rising train fare. The company Chiltern Railways, I hope there's somebody in the room from Chiltern, there's not going to be, they decided they're going to take a stand around obesity and health. Okay, that sounds reasonable. I can sort of get that. And what they've started doing is giving out free fruit at the station in the morning. And all it's done is provoke everybody, because they put through a 10% price increase last year. They haven't improved the trains, still standing only, and they're giving away free nonsense. They've caused themselves far more damage because they didn't think about, is it genuinely in their DNA? I think if it had been something that rang true, or even if they had a historical connection to doing, they might have gone further with it. But an example of somebody who does it incredibly well. This is just an example from Teeling. So this is Jack Teeling. In terms of whiskey, he's got a real belief in terms of bringing back some of the entrepreneurship into the spirits industry, and there's lots of examples like this around the world. But what he talks about is about reviving the independent spirit of Ireland, and he very much talks about what his dad John did, and that's where he says is my guiding light for how I treat my staff, how I develop products, how I move these things forward. It's very true, it's very family, it's very authentic, but you believe it, and there's a reason to understand it. And I think it doesn't have to be like a great strategic thing about your DNA, but if it doesn't ring true to the people in your operation, then odds on it's a bit of a marketing scam and it's probably a dangerous route to go down.
Yeah, so as Henry said, this is about living it, breathing it, and kind of embedding it into everything that we do. So if we have a cause and we believe in it, we want to fight for it, it has to kind of permeate through every part of the organisation. It's not just about marketing communications and greenwashing, because as Henry said, if you do something wrong, if you put one foot wrong, in the best case scenario, somebody will walk away from you. In the worst case scenario, it will be all over Twitter or Facebook or whatever. But this is about kind of walking the walk. So we describe it as sort of living the stance, and this is about embedding what we believe in throughout the full organisation. So does the guy in strategy understand what we stand for as a company? Do they know how we kind of interact and engage with consumers on this issue? Does it resonate in the way we kind of treat our staff? If we have a kind of key value, does that live and breathe in the way we interact with our employees as well as our consumers? So this is really about kind of walking the walk and proving sort of what we do. And this is kind of a well-known example, but it's a great one. So Innocent, their whole kind of proposition is based around goodness. And if you look at everything they do, from obviously the way in which they kind of create their branding, it's fun, it's light-hearted, but the way in which they run their business is built on this philosophy of goodness. So they opened their HQ in Dublin, I think, earlier this year. They kind of ran a campaign about kind of spreading goodness. So you went in and you got a free smoothie if you committed to going out and helping a granny or knitting a scarf for whatever. It didn't matter what you did, but as long as you committed to doing some good. They had free talks, all about this kind of philosophy of goodness. And again, it's not just about the kind of product and the marketing, but if you think about the kind of culture they create for their employees, these guys regularly top the list of best companies to work for in those kind of newspaper surveys. The sort of culture of goodness they encourage in their employees, and they go through kind of training programs, and they empower employees to kind of do pro bono work, etc. So this is a company that stands for something very clear. They talk the talk and they walk the walk.
I think the other thing is you can get very wrapped up in lots of complex discussions. At the end of the day, and especially if you haven't got a multi-million-pound budget to communicate it across totally integrated channels to multiple consumer groups, which most of us haven't these days, then actually you need a really simple, clear message. You need to be able to give consumers an easy soundbite. So when you have an advocate who wants to talk about why it's so great that Innocent have opened up the office in Dublin, they can actually express it on your behalf, because they become the best communicators for you. And frankly, if you don't make it easy, consumers and shoppers won't do that on your behalf. They've got plenty of other things to worry about in life rather than talking about you. So if you sort of get them closer to you and about what you stand for and the meaning you have, you need to make it really simple and easy so they can express to their friends, to people they meet if they feel the need, of actually what it is that you do. I think one of the clearest examples of this. This is Tom's Shoes, if you've seen this. So they have a really clear thought on life. Their message, their values they live by is they want to address inequality in the world. It's as simple as that. They have their line 1 for 1. It's a very simple thing. You buy a pair of our shoes, we'll give away a pair of shoes. So it's about you do something, it's really clear what they're trying to address, it's really clear how they address it. It's not going into some mystery pot that comes out of a CSR program to various committees and boards and initiatives. There's movement, there's action. Wanting to help children in Argentina with new shoes, that's what the Tom Shoes founder did. So again, it's really simple, really clear. And you hear people who have never even bought this brand talk about it because they like the idea of it. And that's some of the power of creating brands with meaning. You get more visibility and more communication outside of even your core consumer group. And actually that's good. If you get other people talking about you in a positive way, it's going to infect the rest of the world around them to be more predisposed to you versus anybody else.
So I'm glad you used the word infectious. That's really what we're talking about when we say create a movement. So one of the things we kind of mentioned earlier is this idea of moving people away from kind of transactional relationship and perhaps that kind of passive buying relationship into kind of participation and engagement. And this is really about creating energy around an issue, why you're doing something, and getting consumers to believe it and to join you. So when we talk about kind of creating a movement, if you can build a sense of kind of collective action amongst people so they feel that by kind of joining you and believing in you that you can make a difference, we know that's still important to people. Can you make it easier for them to do so? We know that people have so many kind of competing pressures on their time. Why should they care? What can you do to make it easy for people to make change in their lives or to contribute to the issue that you're championing? And if you can make people feel kind of smart and switched on, or even give them a reward for doing so, that gives them an even bigger incentive to join the movement, and again builds that energy. And the last point I think is really interesting. So we talk about participation, co-creation, obviously another phrase that we hear talked about all the time. But allowing people to kind of engage with you on the platforms that they feel comfortable with, whether that's through social media or other channels, and giving them a platform to talk about your brand, the things they love about it, the things they might not love about it, and being kind of brave enough to have that conversation and to have that kind of dialogue with people is all about building this movement and this energy. So a nice example is Glinisk, and we found the great website, and what they really stand for is an organic island. This is fantastic. So they say we're on an organic mission and we want some company. So this is what we aspire to achieve, and we want to take people with us. And what they do and what they have on their website are tools to help people take their little steps. Be it small things you can do as a parent to change the way you feed your child or how you think about kind of organic issues. So they are trying to build momentum and energy around this issue. Obviously, they're kind of walking the walk, but they recognize that this is a journey, and they want to take people with them, and they want to give people kind of tools and tips and some guidance on how they can start to do that in their own lives. And they understand that people have competing pressures. It's not easy to make these changes, but if they can help people in a small way to make this change, that's a really important thing. And again, it's building that kind of dynamism and the energy to follow you on your cause and what you stand for.
And the last thing on that checklist, and there were only 7, it does seem like a lot more, I guess, when you hear it all spoken out. But the 7th one is about staying tuned in, which is, you may have decided all of this stuff and started to take action, but do keep those radar, that antennae up, just to start thinking about what else is going on in the world. Is it still relevant? Is it still fit? How's my consumer base changing? And again, you look at a lot of things like socio-demographic change, particularly around markets, actually understanding who is your core consumer, what sort of ethnic background and cultural background are they from, what are some of the values. Maybe you have to reframe some of these things depending on what's going on. So keeping aware helps you be flexible and adapt according to new concerns. And you may be thinking, well, this is all great if I'm an entrepreneurial startup, and we've used some great examples from like Tom's Shoes and Leon Restaurants. Small companies can do it because they're starting from scratch and it's an easy thing to do. This is just as relevant for big companies. And I think the last example we say is very polarizing in some sense is McDonald's. I mean, McDonald's have had a really tough time over the last decade, but in the last few years, their growth, even in developed markets, has outperformed the rest of the quick service restaurant sector, and partly because they've started thinking about this, tackling obesity in the only way McDonald's can, I guess. You know, you can have your own opinion about what they do, but they have changed their sourcing strategies, they've changed their distribution strategies, they've changed their menu strategies with a lot of the healthy things. They haven't put it there for 3 months, they've kept it there. They've even changed the look and the feel of their restaurants. So when you see them revamp, they're softer tones, they're wood, they're not hard, they're not plastic. Ronald McDonald is rarely seen anymore. They have evolved to be very relevant, and they continue to be a successful organisation. And that's because they see themselves, when you speak to them, they see themselves as having a mission to stay relevant and to stay in that health debate. They realise that they are not the whitest of white in that, but at least they are having a go and trying genuinely to do something about it. So 7 things on a checklist to think about, you know, in terms of actually what are consumers facing, what are those tensions that we might be thinking about, what could be our competitive advantage, shall I take a side, what side shall I take, because please don't sit on the fence, it's a painful place to sit. Is it genuine, credible, authentic to me as an organisation? Does it ring true from the shop floor to the CFO? And actually, what can we do to actually bring it to life? If it only exists in PowerPoints and board meetings, odds on it's a bit of hot air in the organisation. You've got to find a way to translate it into some of your day-to-day activities, hopefully in a really clear, compelling way that's powerful enough, as that Glenisky example, in terms of wanting people to join. You know, people want to get engaged because it's an issue that they care about, and they believe that you care about as well because it's true to you. And do make sure you keep an eye on the future. But hey, we would say that, wouldn't we? It's a futures company. So people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And what you do simply proves what you believe. Thank you very much.